Hey everyone, I've decided that maybe for the market on Friday I'm going to make a couple of quilts. So I was just going to go through just a time lapse of making a quilt. So this is not a huge quilt. It's going to be 50 by 60. It's just a lap quilt, something to, snuggle up in front of a TV with, or kids to kind of snuggle up in or whatever, reading a book or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to use some of my fabric panels that I make. This is from my art. So it's all going to be, this one is going to be fireweed. I'll show you the other ones when they're done, but because they're all put together the same way. But anyway, we've got fireweed, or this filled of fireweed. This is a single fireweed. And this is kind of an up close, but a fireweed flower with a bee in it. And I'm going to use these three fabrics. And then the border is going to be kind of a polka dot black. And then the body of the fabric is going to be this purpley, pinky, it's kind of shiny. I kind of like it. Anyway, this is going to be like the main background color. This will be just smaller, like a frame around the pieces, and then obviously my pieces. So just really quick, I'm going to cut off. So I always print on my fabric panels a border of some kind. This one's a little purple border. This one's got a couple borders, and then this one's just a pink with a gray. I actually do that because fabric does not print square. So you might have like one edge. I don't think any of these are too bad, but like one edge that it's narrower down towards the bottom and wider up towards the top on the border, even though it's square. And so I always just cut off the whole border so that I'm into the picture. Actually, I'll usually cut so that my seam line is just inside of the picture. So I might leave this whole gray piece just so that I have seam allowance, but the seam line on everything will be inside of the picture, the actual picture. Anyway, so I'm going to make this quilt, and again, I'm just going to time lapse this. I have lots of tutorials on how to make pillows and that kind of stuff, and this is basically the same thing. I'm just going to cut the black fabric, sew it on the sides, square it off, sew a piece on the top and bottom, square it all off, and then we'll figure out the measurements for this. Anyway, like I said, the finished quilt or finished throw is going to be 50 by 60. Okay, I forgot to show you a step here. So I took the width of each one of these when I was finished being squared up and subtracted that from 50 because that's what I want the width of my blanket to be. And then I cut the side panels here, which I've already sewn on. You divide it in half, and then I added a little bit for seam allowance. So these will now total just over 50 inches wide, each one of them. So now I'm going to square off the ends, and you can't square them off like, I mean, you're probably looking at it like that's way too long. So I'm going to fold it and then square it off. So you can see here in just a second. Okay, so once these are all square, then you need to see how tall they are to see how wide your connecting strips need to be. And don't forget that you need a top strip, a bottom strip, and then 2 middle strips. So you'll have the 3 panels, and then you need a strip in between each one, and then a top and a bottom. So for this quilt, you're going to need a total of 4 strips. So you have your panel, 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 and strip, 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 strip. So I like to try to make all those the same width, like 6 inches or whatever it might be. But anyway, the same width. So that's what I'm going to do next, is figure that out. So I ended up needing a 3-inch strip. So I cut 3 3/4 to give me a little bit of wiggle room and also seam allowances and all that kind of stuff. This is how much I had left. So what I got was 2 yards of this fabric. And then I should have calculated on the black fabric, not 2 yards, but anyway, some yardage on the black fabric and then the panels. So I was cutting it close. I should have done like 2 1/4 yards. Okay, so as you can see on my strips, one piece is only 43 inches wide. You can't, so obviously for the 50-inch quilt, you're going to have to add on to it. So that's what I've done here. So I cut 5 strips when I cut them. And then I cut 1 strip into 9-inch pieces. So we've got 43 inches over here, plus 9 is 52, which gives me just a little bit of wiggle room and a little bit to cut off when I go to square up the whole quilt. So anyway, I have these now, and if you have a pattern, I would recommend like making sure everything's going the same direction or whatever. I've tried to do that on the quilts, but then when I got this done, I thought, I hope that I make sure everything goes the same direction. Anyway, hopefully, we're going to find out here in just a minute. But anyway, so I'm going to go sew these on, and it's the same as we've just been doing. I'm going to leave about 1/2 inch on one side, or maybe a little bit more than 1/2 inch when I go to sew it on, just a little bit of overlap. So this will be a little bit like 1/2 inch longer than this piece when I go to sew it on. And then when I square the quilt up, which I'll show you how to do, I can cut those off. It'll just be a little bit of excess. So that's what I'm going to go do next. All right, so we've got everything sewn together, but we still need to square it up. So this is a little bit of a process here because you gotta like fold it, fold it, fold it. So I'm going to fold it, and what I'm going to line up is these 2 seams and kind of try to make sure it's a little bit square as far as the rest of it goes. And this one edge I did end up cutting off all the pieces, and so if you can see here, so I have a straight edge there, so I can kind of square off the top and the side, and then we're going to fold it. So we've got 1 fold. Gotta lay this out flat over here. And this other side, I was off on my calculations or something. Anyway, the center panel is not square, or is not as long, I should say. Okay, so I folded it in quarters, and as you can see over here, there's going to be a fair amount to cut off on the one edge. The other edge seems to be okay. And then the next thing I'm going to do, because it's too long one way or the other, and so I'm going to fold it one more time. That means you're cutting through a lot of layers. So be really just patient as you go and cut. But I'm going to line up these edges and this edge with, well, we got to line this up better. But anyway, those are the edges I'm trying to line up, not this one that's really out of square. Okay, I'm going to lower that a little bit. So as you can see, we've got this edge. Now if you look, we got to cut way back into here. So I'm going to line this up on a grid line. And I'm going to try to make this, so we're going to go to the 24-inch grid line, so that it's cutting off just a little bit. At that actually, I'm going to scooch over. If I scooch over, can you see this edge over here? Make sure I'm square all the way around. And this one, take your time squaring off, because it really is important to make sure you are very, very square. Okay, so I'm going to have to cut back to, I'm not going to go to the 25, but I'm going to go to like the 25 and an 1/8. So we've got the fireweed and bee is that block, and then this is a single fireweed, and then this one here is called fireweed field. If you'll notice, I did not, so I cut these pieces, let me tighten this back up. I cut these pieces so that they would go this way, but then the next piece, anyway, the way you cut it makes a difference. So I do have different directions. Everything is going, like all the side panels are going down and to your right, and all the other panels are going up and to your right. So they kind of match in that regard. And I guess I actually don't mind it, but maybe, I don't know, if you do, I would maybe get a little extra yardage so you can cut it a little bit differently. The other thing I would do differently is down here, let me go up a little bit more. Down here, I would have done, if I had gotten like 1.25 yards, it would have been, or sorry, 2.25 yards, it would have been perfect. And I would have done a 6-inch border here, just at the top and bottom. And then I don't mind the 3-inch border in the center, but I would have liked a little bit wider border on the bottom. Now this obviously isn't done. I need to do the backing, but I've got 2 more quilts to make, so I'm going to make those first, and then I will do the backing and the quilting. I'm not going to hand quilt them, and I'm not going to machine quilt them. I'm going to probably just tie them so that I can sell them Friday, because it's Tuesday. Alright, so I dyed the backs of my quilts because I did not like the colors at the store. Anyway, so I'm just letting them kind of drip off. My dryer is actually full right now, and then I'll throw them in the dryer. But anyway, I like the colors. I like the bright, vibrant colors. This pink one will go with now I gotta think, the mousse and kind of that kind of stuff. This purple one goes with the quilt that you watched me make. And it's got the purple like streaks through it, and then the blue one will go with a blue quilt. Anyway, I'll show you when I finish what those look like. Alright, so I have this all laid out and you just watched me cut it. So I am not going to do any kind of a binding on this quilt. I'm going to sew all the way around the edges, leaving an opening down here at the bottom, and then I'm going to turn it because it is just a throw, and I'm just going to tie it. So I don't really need a fancy binding, I don't feel like. Anyway, so that's kind of my next step, is to take it to the sewing machine and I do a little bit of wider, like 3/8 of an inch rather than 1/4 of an inch for this, just to give the edge a little bit more beefiness. But anyway, so that's my next step. And I've pinned just a few pins, corners, about 1/3 of the way up, 1/3 of the way up, and then in the middle on the short sides. But anyway, so we're going to get that done. Okay, once you've gone around, you can you see the stitching there? On the corners, you're going to want to cut those back so that you can, when they turn to a nice corner. And if you see that, so when you sew, the batting is going to move, and there's usually, like almost always, excess batting. Not a lot, so it's going to make it lumpy, but so if you want to cut that off, you can. I'm not going to worry about it because it's just inside the quilt. But anyway, I'm going to cut off all these corners. And then I'm going to turn it. So, where did my opening go? Right here. Here's my opening. And so one thing I forgot to say, so when you do this, you're going to put your batting on the bottom, right sides together of the fabric, but make sure the fabric is together. Otherwise, when you turn it, your batting will be on the outside. And you want your batting on the inside, and then you want your two pieces to be on the inside and outside. Anyway, so I'm going to turn this, and then I'll show you. Okay, so for this next step, I just need to sew this shut. So obviously for this one, you're going to need a needle and thread. And I'm just going to whip stitch this closed, and then we'll go on to the tying. All right, the last step for these quilts is to tie them, and you're going to need a larger needle than what you sewed up, the whip stitch the bottom together. And then you're going to need some yarn of some sort. I know this looks weird based upon color compared to this, but when it's just a single strand, it's basically just going to look white. And I think that'll be fine. So I'm going to start in the center. So I have this laid out on my table, and I'm just going to start in the center, and I'm not sure what kind of pattern I'm going to do yet as far as quilting or as far as tying it, but you need to kind of keep it, I don't know, I guess you could do it random, but the whole point of tying is to tie the top layer and the bottom layer and the batting together so that it doesn't shift around. And also the batting that I used is not a cotton batting, it's just a little bit cheaper batting. polyester batting, and it tends to tear if it's not tied together as well. And so I think it's like every 6 inches that you need to tie it, but you should look on your batting bag and see what it says, because it will give you some instructions on tying and how far apart you need to tie those and whatnot. So I'm going to figure out a pattern and then start tying my quilt, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a minute. Okay, so what I've decided to do is to kind of just, so I want to have one row of ties through the center of here on each spot, and then I'm just going to come up basically 3 inches. Actually, I'm going to go 4 inches. 4 inches, 4 inches, and then I'll split the difference between whatever's there and then tie this one. And I'll just use these seam lines here and use my ruler to kind of gauge. And then I'm going to go about every 5 to 6 inches. I'm trying to think if this is 50 inches wide. I'll go every 5 inches all the way across. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll show you kind of how to do this. And actually, I'm starting in the center, but I'm going to start on the edge, and I'm going to be on the top here. So I'll show you. First, don't let your threads get into little knots. And you're going to want, I strung off like 18 feet of thread here, which initially is annoying, but as you go along, you don't want to be cutting thread all the time. So like I said, I'm going to come down about 4 inches, and I'm going to come in about 5 inches. So I'm going to just start there, and don't take too big of a chunk, but go through, pull, and I have a little knot already. Pull through, and then I'm going to tie this first one off with a little tie. I'm going to do it like 3 times because just to keep it secure. And then I'm going to proceed over, continue on every 5 inches, about 4 inches up. And then I'm going to tie as I go along. And then when I get, further down along the line, I will cut. Alright, once you get a bunch tied and run out of thread, then you just have to decide how long you want your tails. I don't like mine really long, so I do waste a little bit, but and there's 1/3 of the quilt done. So I'm just going to continue on. I'll tie next these. Actually, I'll probably just do one or the other, and then I will pull. I'll probably go this way. Pull this up, make sure it's flat. make sure everything lays well, and then I will continue on with the tying. All right, here is the finished product. 3 quilts done. I'll show you here in just a second. Let me readjust my camera.